Please do me a favor. Take a couple of seconds and feel the chair that you're sitting in. Notice it. Do your feet comfortably touch the floor? Mark's does. Or are they dangling just an inch above? Does the top of the seat back reach your shoulder blades? Are you slouching to find comfort, or is the frame forcing you into a position that wasn't meant for you? We'll come back to this in a second. My name is Carl Dobman, and I'm the provost at Lawrence Technological University. Welcome to everyone joining the College of Architecture and Design lecture series. Welcome to those in person that are here physically, as well as to those that are joining virtually. This lecture series allows us to bring guests to the college to speak on topics that impact multiple disciplines in the college and even the broader university. Today we're joined by Sean Vance. But that's not, I'm not done yet. So I asked you to consider your chair and your posture. As designers, we're taught to look at the world through the lens of the human body. We've all seen the Vitruvian Man, that idealized Renaissance image of a man perfectly inscribed within a circle and a square. It's a beautiful notion of a geometric perfection, but it also is a distortion of reality. It suggests if the body doesn't fit within that perfect circle, the problem is that of the bodies and not of geometry. I've known Sean, I had to calculate this morning, I think for over 15 years. We were colleagues together at the University of Michigan, and one of the most enduring lessons I took from Sean's teaching was an assignment he used to give, and he still might. He would have the students stand against a wall and simply draw an arc of their reach. When the exercise was done, the wall wasn't covered in perfect Vitruvian circles. It was a tangled forest of overlapping arcs, some high, some low, some wide, some narrow. This was a map of human variety. That exercise is a microcosm of Sean's career. He spent decades teaching us that our bodies are the primary way we experience society and space. He challenges the ideal to make room for the real. Sean's journey as a student from Tuskegee, then to North Carolina State as a grad student, has been a relentless pursuit of design that acknowledges our most vulnerable moments. I've watched his work impact the way we think about design. He's an associate professor at Temple University. He was the coordinator of the Masters of Science in Design and Health at the University of Michigan, and he also served as the director at NC State's Center for Universal Design. He has a new book. I'll mess with your slides. That's the book. He has a new book that he'll be sharing with us today titled Beyond Health Capacity, Spatial Practices in Inclusive Design. Design isn't just an aesthetic choice. It's an environmental intervention. Sean shows us that when we design for a standard that doesn't exist, we aren't just making a technical error. We're participating in a system of inequity. We're deciding through our design decisions whose body belongs and whose body is an afterthought. Sean's perspective has fundamentally shifted my own work as an architect and my work as a leader. He reminds us that empathy is a rigorous design requirement. To the students here today, Sean's here to help you see the human body in your own drawings and your own designs. He's here to remind you that your reach and the reach of those that you design for is unique, varied, and deserving of dignity. It's my great honor to welcome my longtime friend and colleague. Please join me in welcoming Sean Vance.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Am I on? Mic check. Good to go. First, I'd like to extend a thank you to Dean Crum, Chair Wilkins, the faculty, students, old friends, and most especially to two dear friends, Carl and Sarah, for having me here today. I set out to write a book quite some time ago, and along the way met a slew of different realities of access, of assistance, of health, but most importantly, I found a presence as an architect and a citizen of a craft in reasoning the role of architecture in shaping health. For the past 5 years, I've been studying the role of health access on main campus at Temple University, primarily looking into the mediums of health and healthcare as mediated by students and faculty. The primary research focus has been on how the Temple Health Hospital system connects to Central Campus. They're separated by 13 blocks in the city. And the role of a triumphant of main campus buildings that are intersected by two critical intersections in the city, Broad Street and Cecil B. Moore, formerly Columbia Avenue. Across multiple years at Temple, I interrogated the FGI requirements for different health facilities in order to determine the feasibility of interventions into this one building, the Seltzer building. But I also began to understand its role as one of three in facilitating the primary services and acted to keep an expanding medical system engaged with its residents as students, as well as the people beyond Temple University. This urban artery through a facility, but also through a city, is the initiator of this work. And I began to assess the capacity of medical centers across Philadelphia and across the Philadelphia region. It's kind of weird. Philadelphia is a city and a county and a region all at one. It's really weird. Kind of get me in Detroit. They're 139 square miles, I get you. But we were working simultaneously to catalog various enclosures when this astounding thing happened. You all might remember COVID. And at the same time in Philadelphia, there was the closing of several hospitals. Not because of COVID, they were closing before COVID. Hahnemann Hospital with its Drexel reduction in finances and healthcare. Also the loss of a major center city Philadelphia hospital. And Crozier Medical, which was in Chester, just south of the city. And I found that the role Temple Health played in the healthcare of North Philadelphia was part of that dynamic. We saw that because there was an immediate influx of patients who would normally go to Hahnemann Hospital coming into Temple Health. Gunshot wounds, accident victims, all types of cases. At the same time, Jefferson Health was trying its best to fill the need, building new structures, so they weren't really ready yet. And there was a big gap that was forming in the city. And it was our understanding of the role of Temple Health and the significant healthcare of the city that started a critical evaluation of planning of health and healthcare for me and related experiences. I began to set out in writing this book. What came about was a realization, born out of design research, an attempt to learn what lies beyond the evident environmental factors focused on design, but more critically impacting health. What I found was a unique exploration of what improved the presence of design in health might look like. And my primary mission here with you today is to not explain health access. I do that in a book. But more importantly, increase your awareness of the challenges I found that led me to define health capacity and to address health needs such as infection control and round-the-clock services as architects. If there has been one consistent, even persistent thing about architects, it is our desire to establish a standard. This has been especially true in the contemporary design of health space, which despite the redomestication of medical environments, still operates under a single simple rule: meet the minimum standard. The World Health Organization sets guidelines. The Facility Guidelines Institute publishes checklists. Building codes establish baselines. If a space checks those boxes, it's considered healthy enough. But here is the problem. Those standards were written for the average person in the average city with access to the average hospital. And that average person does not represent everyone. As hospital and clinics have increasingly pulled out of low-income neighborhoods following wealth, insurance, and economic infrastructure, the old model of health optimization has been exposed as insufficient. It never asked what happens to the people left behind. I wrote Build Beyond Health Capacity to give some of these issues voice, maybe even purpose, and proposing a new framework for working. Instead of designing spaces that simply meet health standards, architecture wants to design new capacities, something that is inclusive of the active, specific ability of real people in real places with access and experience within a careful environment. This means redefining health not as a checklist, but as something architecture can build, embed, and make viable even where institutions have refused to go. Herein lies a question that sounds quite simple, but isn't. Does a building receive the public, or does it produce it? We usually think of the public as already existing, people who show up and enter a space. Instead, let us consider an inverse plausibility, that space, by defining who can enter, how they move, and what they're permitted to do, actually creates the public we claim to serve. Architecture isn't neutral. We've all heard that before. It makes social categorization real. To understand this, I'd like to temporarily borrow the philosophical framework of one of my favorites, Carl Sagan, the cosmos. It's my best attempt. Meaning universe, and yet something more built around the suffix of a cosm, which means world, but which I would also like to posit with the help of Green Day is world as we know it. Most of us enjoy an understanding of the two versions of cosms, the microcosm or small world, the individual body, the single room, the intimate space, and the macrocosm, the great world, the institution, the city, the universal system. But notice what's missing. There is no common use for the scale in between, the neighborhood, the block, the community health network. That gap in language, I like to argue, reflects a real gap in the language of design thinking, a critical gap as we evolve towards new concepts such as language learning models to assist us in redefining the intelligences of design. Beyond Health Capacity is a book written for and about the people who fall into that gap, the people who exist outside the institution, the people whose health is shaped by a public condition, whether it be transit, housing, or the lexicon of histories and stress of the urban environment. People who, even in this day and age of multiple intelligences, have no public space designed to support them. The traditional approach to health and architecture works like this: establish a universal standard, apply it health everywhere, and call it done. Square footage per bed, ventilation rates per room, emergency exits, widths. These numbers all come from agencies like World Health Organizations and facility guideline institutes who believe their evidence has exhausted the best possible narrative, and they are treated in their conclusiveness as a definitive entity of health space. This approach is called health optimization, and it is reasonably thinking about health and healthcare until you ask, optimized for whom? Whom were these standards built in a generalized occupancy? Whom do we assume the stable institution is that provides them? The professional staff, the patient, the population. What can they receive there? These optimizations do not ask what a space can do for the person standing in front of it, what their specific body, their histories, their relationships to healthcare need. Instead, I'm interested in the what if of replacing health optimization with health capacities. The shift from asking, does this space comply with a standard, to asking, what does the space enable? I see health capacity as the lived, active ability of a specific person or people to navigate an environment in regard to access to care. It is not a number on a spreadsheet. It is something architecture either builds or fails to build. And that difference matters most in the places where institutions have already failed. If we're going to design for health and capacities rather than optimization, we need a new way to measure what architecture is actually doing. We need a performance taxonomy for evaluating how spatial decisions affect real human capabilities in care and of care. Standard metrics tell you whether a building is legal. A performance taxonomy tells you where a building is functional or not, and whether it supports the people who need to use it. This means moving beyond the square footage and ventilation rates and asking harder questions. Asking questions of acoustic control. Oops, a little too far or too fast. That's where your slides get out of whack and you're like, what the heck is going on? Well, you're asking matters of acoustic control, whether or not someone can have a private, dignified conversation with a doctor in space, or will the neighbors hear everything around them? It's a matter of a community center being used to mediate the absence of care, understanding that privacy is not decorative, it's a clinical necessity. And most importantly, things like daylight equity, that is the natural light distributed across a space, is not concentrated in areas for people waiting and not available in places like service corridors, exam rooms, places where fluorescent light fills a space with a harsh, uncomfortable unkindness. Light affects mood, recovery, and stress, and who gets to say something about whether or not that light is designed for the patient, or the people that work there, or the doctors, or the community, or the family that sits outside of it, is a matter of what the architect can change. Asking the question, can any room serve a community? Can any room serve the health of a space? Monday being a community center, and then transforming Wednesday into a functional health clinic. I ask these questions not only for myself, but for the underserved communities where these things are not an option. They are how they receive health care. And understanding the performance taxonomy in these spaces holds architecture accountable to the human body, not just the building code. We also understand that healthcare infrastructure follows money. And I show this age-old image of Pruitt-Igoe because hospitals, clinics, and specialty care providers cluster in places where there's an institutionalized workforce. Universities, large employers, insurance networks. Where those economic anchors exist, healthcare exists. Where they don't, the picture changes. Communities that have experienced deindustrialization, divestment, or economic exclusion are systematically cut off from adequate medical care. This is not accidental. It is a direct result of planning, a programming model that ties healthcare to an economic geography, whether that's South Chicago, North Philadelphia, Detroit, or the vast stretches of rural and ex-urban America, to name a few. These places are not simply underserved. They have been structurally abandoned by a system that was never designed to reach them. And here is the critical architectural insight. The absence of healthcare is not a matter of empty space. It is a condition that forms the empty space. It shapes the housing stock, the community fabric, and the daily life of residents. The void left by a hospital that was never built or that closed or left is a spatial problem and demands a spatial response. If the centralized medical complex will not come to a community, architecture must find a way to do like the doctors during COVID and go to them. This is not a metaphor. When the macro-scale health system abandons a neighborhood, the architectural discipline has a responsibility to intervene at a microscale. As an intervening architecture, it requires finding the spaces that already exist and asking, what can they do? What can they be made into? In my work during this time period, I recognized that the shift from building hospitals to embedding health capacities was way more important. Not designing a clinic in disguise or adding a better paint color to a waiting room, but rather a genuine rethinking of non-clinical spaces. Clinical environments in housing, community centers, storefronts, libraries, barbershops, whatever I could do with the community, both informally and formally, to provide where the institution refuses to arrive. In my work, I'm constantly asking, what do these things look like in practice? What does it mean to embed health capacity into everyday spaces? I think it looks like asking a different set of questions about rooms that were never designed to be healthcare environments. Instead of optimizing the hospital corridor one more time, the smallest of projects must ask, what can the common room do? What can a community center bathroom do? What can a church fellowship hall do? What would each need structurally and environmentally to do it safely and with dignity and care? For me, the localized performance taxonomy applied at the right scale examines everything from acoustic privacy of a room being used for remote health services to ensuring that conversations remain confidential. It also evaluates the lighting, but also the medical engagement that enables mobile screening. It asks whether a flexible infrastructural grid of movable walls, modular plumbing connections, adaptable electrical layouts can allow a public space to become more when needed and secure that hygienic environment. It's about asking what a pop-up health services environment looks like and how does it return to everyday functions without stigma to a community. This is not improvisation. It's a disciplined design practice that takes the absence of formal healthcare seriously as a design condition. I think we have to shift from optimization for health to an understanding of capacity, capacities of health, that ultimately challenges the way that architecture believes it can be responsible for something. We can no longer treat the practice of architecture as simply dictating to a community what health and healthcare look like. We have to work with them to do that. We have to think about how we embed adaptable health capacities into all of the different ways that we transform and mirror the urban environment away from its systematic inequities to achieve a localized empowerment. I think the hospital, as it currently exists, is not the solution. It is a problem. And in looking at the big hospital, maybe one like down the road, a couple miles in a little town with 2 A's, I have found that the institutional healthcare system operates as a regimented, organized mechanism for people, gaining its sense out of success from treating patients as inventory to be processed, routed, and discharged accordingly to clinical efficiency. This is not a moral failure of the individual doctors or nurses, it's a structural feature of the macro-scale institution, purposely framed as fast food in this image. It is a system designed to manage bodies at volume and not respond to communities with specific histories, specific fears, and even sometimes negative relationships to medical authority. These types of roles fester on our periphery. And the result of that clinical order, the smooth functioning of the institution, actually generates more community disorder. It ignores the social history and spatial mechanisms that define how people actually experience their own health. It asks patients to arrive, comply, and leave. It does not ask what prevented them from arriving sooner or what will happen to them after they go home. To bridge this gap, I think we need to rethink the mesoscale that scale exists in between the micro and the macro. To involve a neighborhood level environment that acts as a transition zone between the closed institution and the open community. These are not smaller hospitals. They're a different kind of space entirely. They involve what I propose is de-escalating spaces, environments that prioritize trust over efficiency, decompressive buffers, spatial shields between the body and the chronic stressors of a divested urban environment. This one here, just beyond what Hahnemann Hospital served. And resilient spaces, places where designed to flex or increase and decrease when crises break out, allowing the community to make the connections that allow them to feel that their healthcare is safe and can be trusted. And lastly, a reparative environment, spaces that spatially acknowledge historical exclusions. Things like redlining, medical experimentation, and institutional neglect are truths that we must face and actively work to heal through design. There is definitely a pattern that is faced in these environments. And I believe that inclusive design can identify the most persistent failures. I want to prevent the cosmetic fix, the ramp added to the side entrance, the sign translated into a second language, or an accessibility symbol painted on a parking space. These gestures, even though they might be legally required, do not change the fundamental spatial logic of the communities they're attached to. The fix is applied afterward as an addition or an afterthought. The adornment makes it appear otherwise. I think that this trap of the cosmetic, these surface level changes that perform inclusion without producing it, are a result of a more sophisticated network of problems. They require a completely different starting point to address. An understanding of the diverse body of people and all its variations across ability, age, culture, and experience must be the premise from which a formal structure for rethinking the built environment is generated, not a spatial consideration at the end. I think that this generative logic should come from what we see happening here, the medical intervention of the street corner. And it requires the architect to confront a difficult question. Who are we designing healthcare environments for, and what are we designing against? I like to think that we're designing against this moment. In the language of health policy, capacity means count. How many beds, how many ventilators, how many square feet of clinical space per 1,000 residents. These are the numbers that get reported, funded, and celebrated. These understandings of capacity are not wrong, they're simply useless on their own because it does not equate to equality. A hospital can have 500 beds and still be inaccessible to a community 3 miles away if their bus line is removed or the intact forms of access are only in English. If the building's design communicates at every turn that a certain diversity of people are not expected here, no matter what that reason be. Mathematical capacity measures in beds and square footages and tells you nothing about the lived experiences of trying to reach care in that space. And I think health capacity is a dynamic spatial practice that actually is lived by the availability of health to a specific environment and the ability to receive care in that environment. This definition shifts the architectural mandate away from passive compliance, building what the code acknowledges and requires, towards an active civic agency, designing the work for people who need it most, conditions for those people and what they actually face. I believe this is a fundamental change in how we understand designing for the medical environment, as it also includes the staff, the personnel in those spaces. and what are the stressors that enable them to do their job better and in a more appropriate or comfortable way as framed by nursing practitioners. We have to ask, did we build something that works for everyone? For me, this process is about leaning into and knowing what these successes look like. Understanding instead a conclusive enfranchisement. The understanding when marginalized communities stop depending on institutional permission to access their own health care, and instead possess a genuine spatial power over the conditions of their care. I think this enfranchisement is a progression of departures. Departures from charity, replacing the institution who grants access on their terms. Departure from allies and agency as the mechanism of architecture, shaping conditions through neighborhood approaches and designing community input around responsive community needs. And the establishment of self-reliant enfranchisement, which is no longer something the community receives, it's something the community owns, embedded into their housing, their streets, their shared spaces. Progress in this framework is measured not by the sophistication of the hospital, but how far the hospital's logic has dissolved into the fabric of everyday life. That's when you know you said something right. At the center of my argument for conclusive enfranchisement beyond health capacity is the tension that runs through every aspect of health and space, the difference between the publics of patient and citizen. The patient is a role in the healthcare system that the system creates. You enter a facility, you are processed, you receive or do not receive care, and you exit. Your role is passive, and the space was designed for clinical efficiency, not for your comfort, your dignity, or your history. This is the closed clinical microenvironment, tightly controlled and designed for throughput. It's indifferent to the outside world. The citizen is a different kind of person, a different kind of space also. The citizen navigates the city shaped by social forces, income, race, transit, housing quality, neighborhood history. Their well-being is not determined by what happened inside the clinic. It's determined by the accumulated conditions of their daily life. And the city, unlike the clinic, was not designed to care for them. The clash between these two figures is the central friction of modern health access. The healthcare system asks people to become patients and to submit to its clinical order. And I would like to see us resolve this tension by deploying non-traditional, inclusive facilities that dissolve medical space into the neighborhood, spaces that meet people as citizens first and attend to their health as a consequence of the architecture. This project is one of the ways in which I'm doing that on Temple University. This is actually from my studio last semester. There's a lot of work from that, some of which was entered into competition. This is one of the ones that did not enter. But I share it with you today because it's a model for what I believe traditional healthcare architecture does and does not do. I think that traditional healthcare has wide corridors. It channels specific movements in different directions and separates the well from the unwell. And for this project, we were asking questions about how do we elevate the experience of both the students and faculty as patients, but also as citizens of the space. And the facility that you see rising up now on the left is actually the new version of what we call the Seltzer building, which we're riding now on Cecil B. Moore, and that is Broad Street that we're crossing with the bridge. And the idea here is to connect the campus to what is now the only medical facility on main campus, and begin to see that medical facility as an instrument of not only student care, but also community care. And so there's ways for the community to come right up through the local transit stop, which is the little orange hut in the beyond on the street side. There's a subway that runs below the Broad Street line, and to come up and actually be part of the medical facilities on the upper floors. And the reason we're doing this is because Temple has always had this place where it served the community through the Broad Street corridor and Cecil B. Moore. When we think of this facility as continuing the urban ecology as a messy environment. Architecture has a dual nature that is not fully reckoned with. It is simultaneously structure and stage. As structure, a building imposes an order, it regulates bodies, defines movement, and distributes access. As stage, as a building, it creates the conditions for something to happen, for people to appear, to interact, to form relationships, and to receive care. Most healthcare architecture has focused almost exclusively on the structural dimension of the patient, treating the building as an instrument of clinical order. I would like to close today by arguing that the stage dimension is equally essential and important to the missing elements of health design in underserved communities. When architecture shifts its attention from delivering clinical capacity to crafting civic nodes, the neighborhood level spaces designed for trust, adaptability, and community ownership become part of it. It creates something new that healthcare institutions have not yet provided, a public stage where people are not the patients to be processed, but citizens capable of shaping and sharing in their own health. This is not an academic observation, it's a practical design mandate for me. And when architecture leans into working at this scale, it permanently closes the gap between the clinical disorders and the lived urban ecology. I think it's an opportunity to transform the built environment into a system that manages health into one that makes health possible. The absence of a hospital in a neighborhood is not a neutral condition. It is an argument, written in the zoning decisions, divestment patterns, and daily experience of people who must travel sometimes an hour for care. Architecture did not create these conditions alone, but architecture has the tools to respond to them and the disciplinary task to treat those as a response as opposed to a responsibility. Health capacity is not a metric to be optimized. It's the quality of space to be designed, embedded in the walls, the light, the acoustics, and the adaptability of every environment where care might happen. The measure of this disciplinary success is not the sophistication of the hospital. It is whether people must exclude those from hospitals or exclude people from hospitals who can't find, reach, and trust the spaces that architecture has built for them. When they can, and franchise has been activated through the capacity that endures. Thank you. Where did he go?
Did he take it?
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vance. Would you be available to answer any questions
Absolutely.
that our audience might
I
have?
tried to cut this down. I had longer and I had to chop a lot out, so.
And then Andrea, if you have any questions from our virtual audience,
I will let you know.
thank you. Anybody?
So it's probably evident that I'm probably older, a lot older than some of the people in this room. So one of the things that happens regardless of race or religion or any of that is the fact that particularly nowadays, the ability to use medicine or surgery to extend life has been vastly improved. But with that goes essentially kind of a lack of community or a lack of kind of a coldness in the structures that are there that provide this. And the thing is that as you get older, regardless how much you are sick sometimes or how much you are ill, you still have a purpose, or you want to have a purpose or a drive to keep finding out about life or finding out about history or whatever. And so a sense of community for older people is really, really important. And I just wondered, I don't know if you're familiar, but some of the designs that are coming out now that take this into consideration, essentially you would have like a community area in the middle, and then you'd have independent rooms surrounded around that. But there's an openness feel to that, essentially. It's kind of like when you get older, you remember what a sense of home felt like, and not necessarily a sense of a house or a structure or whatever. And I think that's very important as you age to have that. And the difficulty, of course, is, right, we now have medications, we have surgery that extend our life way beyond, but the quality of life of that seems to have disappeared. And just like your thoughts on that.
I absolutely agree that the quality of life of it has disappeared, because I think what happens is, in many of those cases, the economic model for how people enter those facilities has several hiccups. And it causes people to choose whether or not they would go to that type of a facility or continue to live with loved ones. And for many communities, that option becomes a very clear choice. I'll stay with family, we'll work it out, we'll stay together, which creates a new tier of problems for not only the individual, but also for the family. And while those facilities are there, they're not easy to also maintain. A lot of facilities have the challenge of what happens as not only the residents, but the actual facility itself get older, right? Or the medical procedures change. How do they adapt into new techniques or new procedures, or even new financial models that are actually giving people insurance to be in those spaces? And so I think the greater challenges of that are, how do we adapt and redesign, but also how do we ensure the maintain or maintenance part of it is important. But that's just the design part of it alone. I think the community part of it is super important as well, in that we have to figure out, what does it mean to integrate those facilities into existing communities? What does it mean to transform a community center, or maybe the tennis court area of an existing, homeowners group, into something that could also support the medical presence? May not be continuous, it may be ongoing, but allows people to stay in the places where they know and have greater transition in the areas that they are aware of. And I see this not only because, Hahnemann closing and Crozier Medical closing, but also ones that were like out in Bucks County, moving to more of a commercial model for medical care. People were going to urgent centers more than they were going to the hospital. They were going to this new infrastructure of things that had a new platform of how they receive your insurance, what they will expect as cash or carry type of care. And I think all those things are very challenging, because again, we're not getting richer every day, right? But the cost of things are going up. And it's not that everything is driven by money, but I think people make a lot of decisions, especially in regard to their health care, based on that. And so my thought was, just out of the experience with COVID, which was to assess, how are people actually dealing with these extreme situations, and how can we transform that into a thinking about the day-to-day services and what people have access to. I think that it's changed some of the ways that Dr. Stanford and others work in their communities. The Abington area in Philadelphia has been doing more of a church-based care system since COVID. And even a high school friend of mine, who had actually a high blood pressure clinic in his barbershop, he's now moved that into now other medical procedures. There's a partnership he does with UPenn, where he's had probably like at least 20 years people coming into Penn, or coming in from Penn to his barbershop to give people blood pressure tests. Well, now he's moved that into other criteria, and he's actually renovating the basement to the barbershop to solve that. So I think it's certain realizations that people have, that the hospital's not the only place. We're not yet to where we have the old doctor's office that was right next door and felt like it was part of the community. But I think we're starting to get to these places where medical interns can come in and be a part of the community, which I think is a very important aspect of it.
Sean, we have another question here.
Yes.
Thanks for the talk. So as you're having these conversations around what the space might look like, how do you weigh the various communities involved? So the medical personnel, the physical plant personnel, the patients, the families. How do you measure the inputs from those various groups?
In many cases, it's just making sure that we record the stories. There's one entity that comes to mind, Esperanza Health in Philadelphia, that I've worked with. And one of the practices was just having events where people from the community would come into their facility and share what they were encountering, what were the barriers that they were facing. And doing the job of hearing that and letting the emotions be in the room, not coming to the table assuming we know what's best. And in many cases, a lot of what I've done is show up with just a pen and paper and be willing to listen. Because for many people, nobody is told, they've not told anybody that they have not had access to medical care or that they need it. And hearing that not only is something from the older population, but also middle age and people with children, it extensively presented a problem that these things, these stories were not being told, they were not being recorded, and therefore the decision in planning or programming the facilities were not being inherited. And so, you know, for Esperanza, it was very important to like do something, putting food out, getting people to come into the space to know that they could bring their family and that they could participate in a process that they were learning about. Many of them didn't know what design was, so they were saying, okay, well, I get to be a part of it. And we had to unpack for them what the design process would be. And the interventions were small in that case. We were looking at like what the value of a bench would be, and providing a place for a medical practitioner to come outside of the facility and talk to people where they felt comfortable based upon the way Philadelphia characterizes the porch. And to get those people to then eventually feel comfortable about moving into the space. We also realized a lot of it had to do with fear. Fear that was maybe the experience of an aunt and uncle, not necessarily their direct experience, but they inherit that emotion. They inherit that bias. They inherit the legacy of that fear. And they pass that down to the next generation who just avoids from the start. And we try to prevent that. Hey, Johnny, what's up, buddy?
Sean, you told me one time that the thing that makes you proud is when you find out your students become licensed. I have
Yes.
since become licensed. Hey, but thank you. So I have a question about the work that you had shown. A lot of it was about how what you talked about was lights and material and corridor width and all that stuff. But what was shown was more urban strategies for connecting the hospital to the community. And one thing that we have here at Wayne State is the mobile health unit. And Kathy Velikoff wrote a really interesting paper about Cedric Price's collaboration with Oakland Community College, where he designed a bunch of mobile education units.
Yeah.
Is there any space in the future for thinking about mobile health units and how an architect gets involved? Because a lot of the fairs that I've been to for health fairs, I mean, it's a bunch of tents that are put into a square. So in the future, is there any kind of looking into that?
Absolutely. In Philadelphia during COVID, we had Jefferson's mobile health unit out. It was very effective, but the constraint of the mobile unit is its presence, where you put it. What made Dr. Stanford's intervention different was they took the mobile unit, put it in a van, and drove to people's porches. They met people where they were, and it changed the dynamic. And the reason is there's these classifications that we often hear of in other spaces, like the sick, the shut in. And the shut in was the key component of that. Shut in means that they are shuttering inside of their own home. In many cases, it might be the medical intervention, or it might be a societal issue that's limiting their coming out into the space. It might be local violence, it might be a variety of factors. But meeting people where they are became the new challenge. And that's what we noticed with the Jefferson model. The unit was parked in what we thought was a central location, but nobody showed up. And even worse, when the city would announce things like go to the stadium area, go to LaCoria Center, we found that there were restrictions on even that, like the need to arrive in a vehicle, to have certain types of identification. So there were other factors associated with it that really challenged the presence of those units and the value of the care that they were providing. So the way that this model asks, well, what can be given to the community directly to do? And we looked at what are the roles of like the community center and being that bridge, because it's already existing. The other factor of it, unfortunately, is those mobile units cost a lot of money, and they can be challenging for things like Temple Health. But we're working on that. Good to see you, Johnny.
to talk. Earlier on, you said it's not always about money, right? I'm just curious because I think it's interesting to have this discussion. The gentleman up front earlier kind of talked about the system, right? And it seems to me like a lot of this is about a kind of agency, both in terms of the patient and the doctor. Because at least the U.S.'s sort of health system is very driven top-down, corporate base, right? And the interesting thing is, like, I actually come from a country that has universal health care, so I know it can be done. And I think a lot of the systems that are not physical systems, the political, economic systems in place, are at odds with some of what you're describing, or at least the agency of the individual and the community. And so I'm wondering, are there any tactics or things that would kind of work in that regard?
So the first tactic for me is writing the book, right? And chronologizing the event, telling the story, but also being an instrument for the next steps, right? Yes, it's true that these things are challenges, but that's what excites us about design school and architecture school, right? To face those challenges head on. I looked at every one of those problems that I saw as an architectural problem because I saw the solution being design, something that we could intervene with intention around a common theme. The key to it was that I had to remove myself from the process as being the design leader. In many cases, I had to take a second stage moment, right? Or I'm acting more as just a listener, or maybe even a mediator, or even a correspondent even, of what people feel like they need, because they were establishing more of those initial precedent than I would be able to actually capture. And so, in that case, it changed the way in which I even looked at my own role. And I find that to be much more palatable for me. And even with my students in my studio, that it's easier to listen to others and design to fit that need than it is to sort of project my own intentionality for that design and look to whether or not it's successful. And so what we've done is try to be more collaborative in that regard. Across my career, NC State, Michigan, and even now at Temple, I always reach out to whatever the health program is to actually understand how are they engaging it? How are they engaging the comfort and trust of their patients? And what do they need in this current model to work more effectively? At Temple, one of the first things that we were doing before COVID hit was the telemedicine industry was looking at what the check-in, check-out process was and how could we make that efficient. And that sort of rethinking of it gave us some tools to use the cell phone and as apps, just like everybody else is doing. But I think what changed was when we realized that these things could tie into the scheduling of the building. Something that a very close partner of mine does is understand what does it mean to be aware of the rooms that are available and the spaces that are available. And that aligns with how you sort of deal with all of your early processing in the medical environment, your triage and your diagnosis now on an individual basis. And the availability of things like a wearable or a smart device to aid in that. But then there was another challenge associated with that. Not everybody has a wearable. Not everybody has a smartphone, right? So again, another barrier came up. And you have to sort of be flexible, not intuitively flexible, sort of adaptively flexible enough to be able to say, well, when that conditional problem arises, I'm going to adapt to it. And I bring all those up because those are the things that the institution is asking us to rely heavily upon. The wearable and the smart technology are supposed to erase all of those conflicts and make healthcare much more efficient. But I think that efficiency is also devoid of understanding. And it's going to create another series of challenges that we see prevalent today in urban communities.
Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Sean Vance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. No hot mics, I got to turn this thing off.